Would you walk us through your all's winter plans, winter weather plans? I guess the House adjourned to call the chair. What's the planning you guys are doing?
Yeah, we did the same thing on our side. We adjourned to the call of the chair because we're, as you are aware, we can't be gone longer than 3 days without the House's permission. So we adjourned to the call of the chair, and we'll reevaluate over the weekend. Obviously, the predictions are pretty wide-ranging, and so we don't want to make a decision prematurely if it turns out Monday is just fine. But over the weekend, we'll be monitoring those conditions and make a decision. Obviously, members travel in from various parts of the state, so we'll try to be respectful of the time it takes them to get here and give an announcement before then.
Just from a parliamentary point of view, just because I'm curious, what does adjourn to call the chair today? Is that like you hold like a pro forma session tomorrow, so you're not out for 3 days, or what does that?
No, it just normally we adjourn to a time certain. So you would say that I move that the Senate stand adjourned until 1:30 on Monday. If we say that, we must come in at 1:30 on Monday and then say there's an absence of a quorum. So it's just a procedural issue, so we can come in, we can flex the time depending on the conditions on Monday. If we end up not being able to come in on Monday, we have in the past had a precedent of retroactively approving the House being gone longer that time and them doing the same for us.
We've got a question from Carmen, who's remote. So, Carmen, can you hear us? Go ahead with your question.
If I remember correctly, I think I asked you this at the end of the session last year, and you kind of didn't have a good answer at that time. But I'm curious if, like last year, the legislature gave the governor sort of unprecedented power by approving the catastrophic health emergency. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you think needs to be done this year to tweak the governor's power in relation to the CHIPA or in relation to, just the fact that he's had an emergency declaration in effect for, like 9 months now?
Well, I thought my answer last year was quite fine. I disagree with your assessment. We're constantly monitoring that. Obviously the separation of powers is an extremely important thing to me, but this COVID is still serious. It's not that all of a sudden we had the vaccine start rolling out and we don't have to worry. We still need to be wearing our masks. We still need to be having social distancing, and it's still a very serious issue within Oklahoma and around the globe. So yes, we monitor that. We don't like governing through executive orders on the national side or the state side, but there are times that it's necessary to allow the governor to have some flexibility, and we continually monitor that every day.
Speaking of wearing masks, there was another large gathering this week where lots of people didn't wear masks. And I saw the Public Employees Association weighed in on that. I guess my question for you is, what are you doing to keep the people who live in the building safe?
We're enforcing it with our employees, and the speaker and I both sent a joint letter to DPS asking for help on enforcing it on Tuesday, and it was well received. DPS is trying to help us, so we're taking it seriously.
Kind of similar to Carmen's question, there's been some discussion this week on the governor's ability to distribute federal CARES Act funding. If more COVID relief funding were to come from the federal government, what role should the legislative branch play in that?
The legislature should have a role in appropriating money. That's constitutionally what we do. And a lot of it depends on how Congress writes it. I was very disappointed the last time that they pretty much ceded the appropriations authority to executives around the country. It wasn't a local issue here. So I've talked to members of our congressional delegation. I've talked to staff for those saying, please don't subvert the constitutional authority the legislature has in Oklahoma. Hopefully they'll listen to that. Hopefully we'll have some more say. It should be a collaborative effort. But if Congress passes it and dedicates that exclusively to the executive, we don't have a lot of say over that. I agree with the speaker's sentiment that the legislature should be involved.
Mr. Pro Tem, I can't help but imagine your daughter asking you a question and your response is your classic, I take issue with the premise of your question. I think that would be just imagining that around the dinner table.
That does happen, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. What was I going to ask you about?
You probably can ask if I read something else you posted.
That's all I want to know. Well, I guess on the mask issue, and I ask this fearing that they'll hear me ask it and take issue with me. But it does strike me that when you walk in the door, the security at the front is not wearing masks. And I know there's sometimes they're behind glass and things like that. But it seems odd to me that if I were a member of the public and I walked in and the first people I saw who are security, I go through checkpoint, they're not wearing a mask. Wouldn't I think that I can just wander the halls not wearing a mask?
I think that's a good question of DPS and Director Scully about what their protocols are there. I'm probably not best suited to answer it, but I try to model. Obviously, during the press conference, I take my mask off. I'm really hard of hearing, and so I have a lot of difficulty with people wearing masks. But as the leader of the Senate, you'll see me, unless I'm seated at my desk for a long period of time, I'm wearing my mask the entire time, and I think we have a responsibility as leaders to model the behavior that we're asking others to do. But that's the question of the people working the front doors is probably a really good question of DPS more so than myself.
The blue shirts are under DPS, is that right?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. One, I did remember what I was going to ask you. Perhaps because you didn't lead with it, the Senate priorities for the year are not necessarily fleshed out. Is there any kind of preview you can give us at this point about, let's say next week gets significantly delayed, we're looking, we're inching up on the committee deadline. So can you give us any preview on things that your caucus has agreed on as priorities?
I'll give you a preview that it's forthcoming. We had a caucus meeting yesterday and we did approve an agenda, but I've got some work to do before we unveil that. Depending on the weather, I think you'll start to see us roll that out next week in its entirety. Obviously, if the weather doesn't allow, we'll have other issues. But I don't want to prematurely put it out, but expect it next week.
Speaker, it's come up before that leadership...
Did you just call me the speaker?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was talking about... Apologies. I was working with the speaker earlier today.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So, changes to the initiative petition process have come up before, and you previously said you were open to those and interested in kind of fleshing those out. Can you give any more specific details as to what exactly you'd like to see changed?
Yeah, so I'm speaking on behalf of myself on this, not the caucus. Where I am most interested is if the differentiation between changes statutorily versus changes constitutionally. I think it's very meritorious to have a discussion on should it pass by a higher threshold if it's going to amend the Constitution. Discussions are ongoing about all of those. There's several vehicles in the works. Some of them are regional, congressional district, county. Where I personally fall is more of a differentiation between are we going to amend the statutes or are we going to amend the Constitution. We have a higher threshold here to be able to do certain things, and I think it's, and you have a higher threshold to pass a bond issue. Locally, I think there's precedent and a lot of good reason to do that. We shouldn't be just changing the Constitution every time we turn around.
Yeah, and I mean, it's talked about that maybe the process of plan is too easy, and organizers have said that's not the case, that it's actually super difficult to even get a question like that on a ballot. What's your response to them saying that?
Well, I think if you look around the country, the Atlantic had a article probably a year or two ago about how out-of-state billionaires are influencing states that have a lower threshold. Oklahoma is amongst those states that they test a lot of things in through our initiative petition process. And I really do think that we need to look at that threshold to see if it's proper. I believe it was the Atlantic that had the article, but there really are billionaires and foundations around the country that target states like Oklahoma because of our threshold, and I think we need to look seriously at that.
One more follow-up for you. So an example of that happening was with State Question 805 and criminal justice reform. We saw millions of dollars being poured in from
I'm sorry, what did you say?
that in State Question 805 last
Okay.
year with criminal justice reform. We saw millions of dollars being poured in from out of state and trying to get that to pass, but then the voters didn't, and there wasn't much money even spent on our opposition campaign. So while that is happening, but it doesn't necessarily always seem to be working.
Yeah, but because you have one good example doesn't mean it makes the case. I think you're exactly spot on that last year billions of dollars, or not billions, a lot of money was spent on trying to promote that. Very little money was spent against it, but that doesn't always happen. That's probably the exception to the rule. And I'm not dead set on one way or another of doing it. I just think we ought to have the discussion on amending the Constitution is a serious deal, and we should take that with the level of seriousness it deserves.
It's a great segue, maybe not as good a segue as you said you didn't want to see whether your senators are taking the diabetes medication. I thought we could talk about managed care. But criminal justice reform, that state question failed. And I think that sometimes in this building, different factions have a tendency to say something passed, so then there's a mandate for other things. And then conversely, something failed, so now, while the people spoke, they don't want anything related to criminal justice reform. It seems to be a different climate this year regarding criminal justice reform. I haven't seen as many bills, and then there are bills that maybe even go the opposite direction, that roll some things back or increase punishments or relating to protests. There's a handful of pieces of legislation. So overall, what do you see? You're in more conversations than I am, obviously. What is the situation involving criminal justice reform this year?
I think there's still a desire and a will to continue to balance that pendulum. The problem is when you have the pendulum, obviously when we started on this, pendulum was way far out of balance with locking people up for extended periods of time with no flexibility for crimes that we probably could do rehab with. And we were over here on the pendulum, and then we started swinging that pendulum at a rapid pace to the other direction. I think there's some people that question, did we put the thought into it, or are we too far on the out of balance? Do we need to let these reforms work? But I think that 805 was unique in that it was a bridge too far on repeat offenders, and I think there was unique qualities about that made it egregious to a lot of people, including myself, who have been involved in the criminal justice reform realm for quite some time. My commitment to continuing to make sure it's in balance has not waned at all, but you're right, the temperature does change in and out depending on the election cycle and what it's been on the ballot, but there's still aggressive pushes to get us to be smart on crime, and I'm still part of that camp.
Just to go back to the masking for 1 second, you said you and the speaker sent a joint letter to DPS and that you got a good response. Can you flesh out what that response was from them? Do they have any concrete plans going forward? And then what would your message be to groups who may be coming here over and over and holding those big gatherings with no masks?
Respect your fellow man and woman, and wear your mask. The group in particular that came out here the last 2 weeks and refused to wear, the largest, I'm sure there's others, but claims to be dedicated to valuing life. And let's demonstrate that in our actions. If you value life, value the life of people who you're around. We come into contact here at the building. You don't know what our health conditions, to the point of Janelle's question earlier. I don't know when I'm sitting in this room if you're asthmatic, if you have a comorbidity. I need to respect the health of others, and I strongly encourage you to comply with it, wear a mask. We have rules for a reason. It's not just because we want to play around. It's because real health is at stake and people's lives are at stake, and I value life from conception to the end, and I encourage others to value it while they're here as well.
I couldn't help but notice that the pastors think there were two of them of the week. I think they were maybe from the Bryan County area. They were seated next to your desk, where they typically will take their space, and they weren't wearing masks. They're not lawmakers. They're following under the other rule. At what point do you walk over and ask folks like that? Or is it difficult because, hey, to the right, there's other people who are lawmakers who aren't wearing masks? But I just, I'm not saying that needs to be your job, but I just happened to notice that they were right next to you, not wearing masks. And it stayed that way.
Yeah, I noticed it as well. If you notice, toward the end of the week, they were sitting on the back row with their mask on. And so my job before I became the pro tem of the Senate was the floor leader, and you enforce the rules of the Senate. And that's Leader David's job and her assistant floor leaders. I don't police it near as much as I used to. But we've got to respect each other, and I saw that as well, but they did start complying toward the end of the week. To be fair, I did not have that conversation with them, but we did talk about making sure that guests comply with the rules.
We've got a question remotely from Quentin Shannon. Quentin, can you hear us? Go ahead.
Yes. You just said a little bit ago that State Question 805 was reached too far. Senate Bill 704 takes up the same policy with some changes with regards to the types of offenders that will be excluded from sentence enhancements. I'm curious if you can share your thoughts on that Senate bill and whether it's more in line with what you would think is appropriate.
Quentin, that is an excellent question. I have not read 704, so I need to read that and get back to you. Who's the author on that bill?
Sorry, I don't have it right in front of me, but I can email it to you guys.
Yeah, please do.
Raider.
Okay, I'll have to take a look at it and give you. I'd be happy to give you my opinion after I read it, but I have not read it.
Anyone else?
I love that.
Anyone else in the room?
Anything we're missing coming up next week? Anything you're looking forward to besides the snow, I guess?
No, but I will give my committee chairs and the floor leader a lot of credit. We're rolling along. We had 21 bills on the floor today. Our committees are working very effectively, hearing the bills that were before them. There's some pent-up demand from last year on some of these bills, and I want to applaud the efforts of the floor leader, her team, and the committee chairs. They're working extremely hard to make sure we get back on track.
Senator, this could be every Thursday?
Yes. So I do a Monday availability and a Thursday. Thursday will always have the in-person component and the virtual. Monday, Aaron and I've talked. We think, just time-wise, it makes sense to just do it virtual because we're always running to the floor. But yes, I plan on always being available Monday and Thursday for press availability. All right. Thank you.